Let's do it. Let's do it. Broadcasting from around the world, you're listening to the First 100, a podcast on how founders acquired their first 100 paying customers. Here's your host, Hadi Radwan.
Alex, good to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks very much for having me.
Great. Let me just start with a quick introduction for our listeners. My guest today is Alex Leonardi, the CEO and co-founder of VectorShift, which is a developer of a no-code platform intended to help developers build and deploy generative AI workflows. Alex, explain to an 8-year-old, what does this mean? What does VectorShift do and how it works?
Yeah, so VectorShift basically tries to extend the audience who can actually work with and build their own custom AI-like workflows to people who are not just, like hardcore developers. Because building these sort of AI workflows requires a lot of integration with the actual large language model providers, databases, integrations with other data sources you might be working with. And building all of those things out oftentimes can be a challenge, especially if you're trying to build it on infrastructure that scales to more production use cases. So we're trying to make it very easy for people to go on, take existing solutions, modify them, customize them, and then be able to run them for whatever task they see fit.
If we pick a use case today and we want to use VectorShift, give us an example. How would the customer journey look like?
Yeah, so I think the use cases sort of differ based on the client and also the stage the clients are in. So like for, let's say a small to medium business, usually the use cases can be something like, generating like custom emails for like personalized outreach, for example, or taking documents that you may have just like received and being able to quickly summarize them or generate reports in a very specific format that you've seen before using those documents. Actually, a lot of our go-to-market motion so far has actually been more on the enterprise side, so larger companies. And those use cases tend to be a bit more complicated. So like, for example, with one of our very large enterprise clients, we're working on like automating the responses to these proposals that come in, asking them to fill out, like 200 plus questions about their company, about their product, the legal stuff. And we're actually connecting into all of their data sources so that with like a press of a button and like just a bit of context information in the actual proposal that they got sent, it'll automatically generate the response to all of their questions. And that's normally a process that takes them like weeks. We turn it into one that takes hours. So, like I said, it's a very flexible platform that lets you do a lot of different things.
Amazing. Walk us through the early thought process on how did you identify that this is a pain point, and then how did you go out and prove it? I know you've just finalized your Y Combinator demo day, so you've been through that process. Walk us through how you thought around it.
So my co-founder and I, Albert, have been thinking about this space for a while now. I actually, while I was in college, I did a double major in statistics and computer science, did a concurrent master's in AI and machine learning. So I've been thinking about applications of more AI type technologies to business for a while now. I actually went to work at Blackstone, which is a financial institution, specifically to try and figure out how to apply these sorts of technologies to more financial use cases. So I've been thinking about it for a while. And same with Albert. After he studied statistics in college, ended up going to McKinsey, and focused his last year in McKinsey was focused very heavily on like generative AI deployments within these companies. And the truth is, when we talk about these sorts of things, like the main thing we identified was that like generative AI as a whole paradigm is a very flexible paradigm. And oftentimes right now it's getting used for like really vertical solutions, like very specific use cases, which is good. It does very well at it. But fundamentally, it's not like a vertical specific solution. Like you can use the same large language model for a very large number of use cases and it will do very well. So basically the way that we identified using the like creating a no-code platform, a more horizontal approach to generative AI rather than a vertical one, is that we think that generative AI has the flexibility to do very well as a horizontal solution. And it's something we identified pre-Y Combinator. We were lucky enough that when we joined Y Combinator, we started working on this, we did see pretty quick demand from like upmarket clients, which were the people we were targeting, primarily because Albert and I both have like experience working with more upmarket clients. So we just kept building. And then eventually we also launched the public version of the platform, which has also seen pretty good demand. So I think it's just very generally, like there is demand to try and access these solutions. It's a little obfuscated if you're not super technical to be able to work with these things really well. So we just want to reduce the barrier of entry, basically.
Amazing. And if we go back to your early days, do you have currently any customers that are paying you, or you're still in proof of concept mode?
No, we do have. So we have several customers right now on the upmarket who we're working with. I won't share the names just because we're under contract with them. But we have roughly 6 upper mid-market to large enterprise customers between let's say, tens of millions of revenue per year to several billions of revenue per year. Primarily, like I said, on the larger enterprise side. And then we have I think we have roughly 600 users on our public platform now, with a few of them paying. Many of those users are still on our free tier, just playing around with things, but a good portion of them are paying now as well.
This is great, and good luck growing even further. But if we go back to your enterprise sales motion, because this is a longer sales cycle, how did you approach it? How did you convince enterprises to use your platform early on?
So Albert actually leads our go-to-market motion. I do much of the technical work right now and the fundraising. But effectively, the way Albert has approached this is we both have experience working in with large enterprises. Him in particular at McKinsey, his deployments have been going into larger companies and figuring out how to help make things more efficient, how to help people do their jobs more effectively, et cetera. So we actually started primarily targeting sales use cases. Now, all our pilots are not entirely sales, but a large portion of them are, because Albert has done a lot of work within the sales vertical. So we went in with sort of knowledge of what sorts of problems these salespeople are facing. And effectively, instead of trying to sell them a no-code generative AI solution, we tried to sell them solutions to their sales problems. And in particular, we told them we'd be doing it through generative AI. We'd be doing it through a flexible platform. And I think this helps enterprises solve several of their pain points. One is that these are actual problems they're currently facing. It's not that they have to come up with a problem of what can generative AI solve and how can we apply it? These are actual issues they face. But that's also coupled with the fact that many of these enterprises do have significant incentive to try and incorporate generative AI into their workflows, both from management, from shareholders, et cetera. People see this as the direction the world is going. And a lot of these larger companies are facing pressure to figure out how they can stay with the times and incorporate this into their processes. I think given that combination of we have a solution that one, we can help them build into something that directly addresses what issues they're currently facing, and two, can scale well into solving several of their issues and becoming a provider of generative AI solutions that rapidly can get them to different use cases as time goes on. I think it's become an easier sell. That being said, it does still take time. So Albert, basically from week 2 of Y Combinator, which is now 2.5 months ago, has been working, talking to VPs, directors, the individual salespeople within enterprises to generate buy-in for the solution at all levels. And over time, if you can get enough people in an organization to be interested by the solution, we found that you can push it through.
This is great. If you go back to this strategy specifically, how did he find those leads and how did he convince them to reply to him? Because this is the most challenging part, where you're maybe cold emailing them, doing a cold outreach or warm introduction. Is there a specific framework that you guys have used that has been successful for increasing the response rate?
So there's a few people who we've spoken through warm intros. I mean, Albert and I both have pretty robust networks within enterprises, but it's actually a minority of the people we're working with right now have been through intros. So I'd say there's a few different methods that we've seen. One is a large portion of it just comes from cold outreach that's been refined through A/B testing of actual emails to see what gets people interested. This has also been useful talking to other people within Y Combinator who have been doing this to see what sorts of emails work for them. But also Albert and I, previously grew this consulting business in college to a little over $1 million in annual revenue, working primarily through cold outreach, once again to larger companies. So we had some experience going in terms of how we did that and how that was run that we applied to this, which once again is just a matter of what sorts of emails do people respond to? What cadence do you set? It's very important to make sure your emails are in a cadence, not individual emails, because people very rarely respond. Well, not very rarely, but the number of people who respond to the first email is smaller than the number of people who will respond if you send them a chain of emails reminding them, right? So we've set that up. And then a good portion also comes from reaching out to alumni networks of things we've been a part of. So our college alumni network, McKinsey's alumni network, et cetera. These oftentimes have people in more senior positions that can help us introduce to other people within the organization. And then ultimately, it comes down to, are you selling something they actually want, to determine whether or not you actually make it through. But, it's a good way to get in the door.
What has been the most challenging part of this process?
The sales process or the process of running the startup overall?
The sales process.
Yeah. So I think part of it is that a lot of people within more target market we're working with are like not super familiar with how generative AI works. I think it's, as you become more senior and the executives are forced to think more about the state of the future, like people start to recognize this. But there's a lot of people, I think, who still don't fully understand the capabilities that generative AI like holds. And especially I think it's also wrong to just limit your like the understanding of the capabilities of generative AI to like what you've seen on like, let's say, ChatGPT. Because, oftentimes people are like, when we tell them about generative AI, they're like, yeah, we use ChatGPT. It's like a neat trick, but it's not really useful for us. But the truth is ChatGPT is a chatbot built on like singular calls to these large language models and some clever memory tricks to let it keep the previous conversation history. But oftentimes that's not like the optimal approach to doing some more of these complicated tasks. Like you can get a lot more sort of complexity out of the solutions that you generate by combining the large language models with other data sources, by chaining them together, by creating more complicated graphs of like connections, basically to let like encode more analytical reasoning into the workflow you're building. And that expands very drastically like the types of things you can do. And early on, it was sort of like, I think we had a lot of pushback in the sense of like, yeah, but I don't think ChatGPT could do this, so therefore I don't believe your solution could do this. But there's like a pretty big dichotomy between what ChatGPT, like singular calls to language models, can do and what you can do by encoding a more complicated process, which we've been trying to explain. Once again, it's like it can get a little difficult sometimes, but I think the hype behind trying to get generative AI into enterprises helped us carry through that a little bit, because people generally are like, I think most people can extrapolate beyond it. It's just something we've noticed.
This is great stuff. Thank you for sharing it, Alex. So Y Combinator's principle is do things that don't scale.
Yes.
What is something that you've done
that doesn't scale? Yeah, I mean, I actually think like our go-to-market motion right now is like not super scalable in hopefully the Y Combinator way. But basically like we initially for our enterprise clients are actually like directly working with them to build out the initial use cases for them. So like we are like the platform VectorShift provides a series of core components, but those core components on their own are like, one, probably not at the moment like enough to cover all the different enterprise use cases that we're working with. So we're constantly adding new ones to the website. And two, like, there's like integrations to the specific data sources. There's the actual creation of the framework of each individual pipeline. These are non-trivial tasks that frankly, if we just gave them to the enterprise as is, they would not be able to do it. So Albert and I are actually going through and implementing these one by one for our initial enterprise customers. And, eventually we do have a long-term that does scale through this, and that like every solution we create for an enterprise, if we can isolate out any proprietary information and the data sources and just leave ourselves with a core logic engine, we can repackage that core logic engine for other enterprise use cases doing the same thing. For example, for this like report generation for this one enterprise client we're working with, it's like a use case we've now heard across like 80+% of salespeople we've spoken to as being like a major pain point. So, if we can isolate out that core logic, we can then significantly increase the rate at which we can implement it for other clients. At the same time, right now, it is us effectively doing pseudo consulting work for each of these clients using our platform, which is not super scalable. But, it gets people in the door, and it makes it a much more compelling value proposition for people at the beginning.
Thank you for sharing this, Alex. There's two ways you can approach maybe early on the client attracting it into your product. One is you pitch them and then they pay for a proof of concept, or you pitch them, you take their problem, you create a proof of concept, and then you sell them your license, let's say, or implementation fee. Which one are you for, and what are the pros and cons?
Yeah. So, I mean, right now, our approach has been we're doing like pilots with implementation fees associated, that then they have a choice at the end to whether to convert. And if they convert, we also like put in like an annual contract, and then there's the recurring revenue associated with that. That's the way we currently work. And I'm assuming the other one that you're speaking about is, I just want to make sure I'm getting this right, like basically starting with a contract and like showing them the demo, getting them to like buy the actual product, and then seeing like whether they like it or not. Is that what you're referring to with that first one?
Essentially, you're pitching them your idea, and then you say, give me a problem that you have, and I'll show you how my platform would solve it for free, like a proof of concept, and then they would commit to a contract. Yeah.
So we do a hybrid of this. I think there are benefits to both things that you just stated, which is why we do a hybrid, which is we actually, when we're on the sales call, we're at a point with the platform where it actually does a decent number of things out of the box. So, and we have like a few solutions created out of the box. Usually now at this point, when Albert goes to talk to people, he'll ask them like, what are some of the problems you have? And he'll actually run the things that we have out of the box that are pretty like in the direction of doing that. And usually like if you can show people a demo that like shows them how your platform would solve something, even if it doesn't directly like show the solution exactly yet, I think people directionally get the idea and get more excited. So I think that's the benefit of showing people on the call being like, hey, this is sort of what it looks like for free, I guess, how we'd solve your problem, and then get people to actually buy it. We show people sort of how it would approach it, and then we move into like a pilot period, which is like, paid, etc. And then they get the decision at the end whether to convert or not. The benefit of obviously doing something free throughout is that like you get the final solution in their hands. Like more likely, it's more likely someone will want to do a pilot for free than for a paid amount of money. And if your solution is truly good, then they'll buy it. But I find like oftentimes with these earlier stage startups, like it's unlikely that we're like a 3-month-old startup now. It's unlikely that these solutions are going to be like perfect oftentimes. So it's useful to have at least some implementation fee to get people invested in like helping you out. Because if you don't get people to pay you for something, it's likely they will be less invested in helping you. And for us to help make these solutions like closer to perfect, we want to make sure there's very active engagement with the pilot partner to like help us out with, if we have any questions, if we need more access to data, etc. Which is why we've opted for the more paid route.
What's the best advice you got from Y Combinator?
They've got a lot of advice from Y Combinator, and a lot of it is pretty good. I'd say like one thing, obviously the do things that don't scale is great advice, but we've already covered that. Another thing that actually I think has been helpful is Y Combinator really pushes you to launch early, which is interesting because for our business in particular, it was like a bit weird to launch because we're an enterprise for sales motion. Oftentimes people like sort of lock these behind more demo type platforms, et cetera. So people don't really see what's going on. But I think the advice to like get something out there and to launch has been quite helpful because one thing we found is it gets us to work faster because we sort of had an internal deadline for like mid-August in our head for this is when we like need to get the platform out. We like got there like a week early or so. And the reason for that is like now we actually have like a product that sort of in itself works we can use to demo, et cetera. But we also now, since we have launched, and even though like our enterprise motion is like our primary go-to-market motion right now, we have a lot of like organic users from the bottom up. And that's been very helpful in helping our platform just become more user-friendly, which is good when you're selling into these enterprises. Like it's not necessary. Oftentimes enterprise software is kind of difficult to work with. But if it is user-friendly, I think it improves your odds of people actually wanting to work with it and increases your pilot conversion rates. It increases the odds that people actually go in and use the platform self-serve, which is great because it reduces the amount of time we have to spend on implementation. So the launch early advice for us has been very helpful. I can see that if you're not running an enterprise motion, it would be even more helpful just because getting that user feedback is extremely valuable if you're selling directly to your users through a bottom-up motion.
What advice do you have for people who want to join Y Combinator on increasing their chances to be accepted? Anything that you could share with our listeners?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So one thing I'll note is like Y Combinator doesn't necessarily take people who have like traction, let's say. Like, so it's not really about like getting revenue or having already built something. Like if you do, it's like not a downside. Like Y Combinator accepts plenty of people with traction, et cetera. But I think the most important thing that Y Combinator looks for is like people who they think are like willing to work very hard, who have really thought through their problem space and are able to think through new problem spaces very quickly. So like that's why a lot of the Y Combinator interview expects like really short answers that are like very quickly delivered because they just want to test like have you thought through things, and if they send you or they ask you something you haven't thought through, are you able to respond to it very quickly? The other thing I'll note is like the co-founder relationship is very important for Y Combinator. So like my co-founder and I have known each other for over like 5 years now. And we've done a lot of things together and we've worked together before, et cetera. And Y Combinator takes big bets on like co-founders who like know each other and have done good, like cool things together, because ultimately like when you're doing a startup, it's like a multi-year experience. And the number one cause of death in early years is breakups between co-founders or co-founders just giving up. So finding someone who can like motivate you and who works well with you and who you enjoy spending time with is like a very big plus. And luckily like we have that. So we're optimistic in that regard.
This is great advice. Thank you for sharing it, Alex. What's a principle that you live by that has served you well in your journey?
Principle that I live by. I have a few like core guiding principles. I mean, one is that like my perspective in life is to very much try and maximize the good I do and the impact I leave by the time like I get there throughout the course of my life. I think a lot of that has driven me to work pretty hard. It's like very motivating to know that like when you're actually building your own company, like you can take the direct decisions that you want to like sort of achieve your goal in life. And I think for a startup in particular, it's very helpful because I really liked my previous job, just to be clear. I enjoyed the team. I think the work was interesting, but it's different when you're in a startup and you feel like you have full autonomy over your decisions and you have like ownership over your decisions. So if you actually make like changes or if you like build products that people are using, et cetera, you feel like a lot more sense of like connection to what you've done. And that for me, for someone who's like very interested in seeing like my impact reflected on like what it does for the world has like been very compelling. It helps with determination. Obviously, it's like running a startup is a very, I can get pretty like challenging in terms of the amount of work you have to do, the amount of like sacrifices you have to make more personally in order to focus on it, et cetera. And just being very motivated to continue working on it for like a greater reason than just like you want to do a startup is, I think, been very helpful.
Amazing, Alex. Thank you for sharing this. What's next for you and the startup?
We have some pilots to deliver on. We have some more product to build. We're actually going to start hiring quite soon. I've been working with some very smart individuals on like, various bases, and we want to see if we can now start expanding the full core team. Because so far it's just been Albert and I doing most of the work, and like I said, have been running the technical aspect of things. Albert's been doing the go-to-market. Since we are like a AI/tech startup, we do want more technical talent on board. So we're looking to hire some engineers. We actually just posted our first job posting on the Y Combinator Work at a Startup board. So hopefully we'll get someone within the next few months to start helping out there. And then I think we're not going to look to blitzscale right now. Like we need to, make sure that we're building something people want, to use Y Combinator's words. We have good early indications, but now it's just going to be some process of like narrowing down to make sure like one, we're delivering on the early indications of interest we've seen, and two, continuing to build this out into something that's like useful for people.
Amazing, Alex. Thank you for stopping by and sharing your story. We wish you the best of luck. How can people reach you?
So you can reach me at my email, which is alex@vectorshift.ai. I'm happy to talk if anyone has any questions. But yeah, no, thanks very much for having me. This was great.
Thank you so much for listening to the First 100. We hope it inspired you in your journey. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to our podcast on Apple iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or Spotify, and share it with a friend starting their entrepreneurship journey. Leave us a 5-star review. Your support will help spread our podcast to more viewers.